The scripture lesson today is from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 34, the New Living Translation. Then Moses went up to Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab and climbed Pisgah Peak, which is across from Jericho. And the Lord showed him the whole land, from Gilead as far as Dan, all the land of Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judea, extending to the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev, the Jordan Valley with Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to Moses, "This is the land I promised on an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have now allowed you to see it with your own eyes, but you will not enter the land." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, just as the Lord had said. The Lord buried him in the valley near Beth Peor in Moab, but to this day no one knows the exact place. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyesight was clear and he was strong as ever. The people of Israel mourned for Moses on the plains of Moab for 30 days until the customary period of mourning was over. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him, doing just as the Lord had commanded Moses. There has never been another prophet in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. The Lord sent him to perform the miraculous signs and wonders in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all the servants and his entire land. With mighty power, Moses performed terrifying acts in the sight of all of Israel. This ends our reading.
Thank you, Ed, for reading this last chapter of 5 books of Moses, the last chapter in Deuteronomy. It is a beautiful, dignified coda for the entire Torah, the book of books of law, 5 books of Moses. Mount Nebo, or Nebo, in Jordan, nowadays it is almost a suburb of Amman, the capital city of Jordan. On the edge of the Transjordanian plateau, eroded somehow, but it is like flat on the top and then overlooking Jordan Valley. And on a clear day, I'm told, you can observe the other side of that Dead Sea Jordan River, Rift Valley. Deep on your left side, I need to gesture with my right hand. So deep on your left side will be down deep, will be Dead Sea in the transfer rift. Above it, high, will be Qumran on the opposite side of that valley. Right below you, something like 4,000 feet below you, will be Jericho. And above it, on the other side, and slightly higher than you are standing, on the other side, on a bright day and a clear day, you could see suburbs of Jerusalem. Back then, that would not be the case, but you can see Mount of Olives there, or what is being called Mount of Olives. And further right, there'll be in a greater distance still, Shechem, Nablus, Samaria back then, in the New Testament times. And on the northern horizon, you could theoretically sense the mountains of Galilee. But it'll be more like theoretical, but just imagine in front of you this beautiful panorama of the land. Of course, it's a little exaggerating saying that you could see Judea all the way down to Mediterranean Sea. You cannot. Physically, it's impossible. Those mountains around Jerusalem are actually higher than you are sitting. But it is still an awe-inspiring panorama from that mountaintop. Awe-inspiring, and one can imagine that there are these places where we are even emotionally and spiritually moved. It has a main impact on us from within. The meaning and ethos of this story here in America is even deeper than that. This passage became inseparable from the last sermon of Dr. Martin Luther King. I had been on a mountaintop. And it gives me shivers every time I read it or when I think about it. Not only the words, but what happened afterwards. Martin Luther King became an illustration, actualization of the Moses on the Mount Nebo. That magnificent panorama, geographical panorama, was transformed and changed for all of us into a panorama of racial justice and civil rights and social justice, as that became heavier and heavier on the heart of Martin Luther King towards the end of his ministry. And this panorama is now opening in front of us. It might be forever kind of just out there, few more steps, but forever few more steps before. It's an aspirational dream. We are accomplishing things as we go, as we struggle. And let us hope that racial equality in our nation will become reality sometime soon. But full realization of social and civil justice, as much as we must work for it, I think to a large extent will be always aspirational. Because justice is never a done deal. It always needs to be strived for. And the history of Israel and returning back to Moses is an encapsulation of that. Yes, they crossed Jordan under Joshua, but did everything become immediately a land of milk and honey? Of course not. We know the story. But I want to, for us, think about it from a slightly different perspective also, for our own understanding. Now quoting more or less from memory. I wrote it down, but it is from my memory, from Reinhold Niebuhr. You probably know that quotation, maybe better than I was able to put it down. But nothing truly meaningful can be achieved in one lifetime. And so there is need for hope. Nothing truly good is immediately obvious, and for that reason we need to have faith. And nothing virtuous can be accomplished alone, and for that reason we need to have love. And for us as a community, I think it binds us together to strive for the justice, racial, social, civil rights. And we recognize that we are continuing upon those who preceded us, and we are handing it over to next generations. And then Reinhold speaks about forgiveness. Because we all are human beings. And Martin Luther King, just like Moses, they're human. And humility and humbleness of all of it makes it truly moving, profound, and meaningful. And now I want to speak to you about the authorship of this bright and moving biblical jewel. Next several weeks, we will always pick similar biblical gem and seek not only their meaning and message, but also try to uncover as much as we can their authors. So who was the author of those 5 books of Moses? You know, after reading what Ed just read to us, even a child can see that they could not possibly be written by Moses. There hasn't ever been an author who had given an account of their own death and funeral. You know, it's obvious. And that is not only contradiction. 5 books of Moses are full of other anachronisms or contradictions. For instance, biblical patriarchs could not possibly own camels. You know, thinking about where they were supposed to live, they could not have camels. They were not domesticated by the time. We know it. It would be like insisting that you heard on your own ears recording of George Washington's address. You could not. And if someone is writing it, you know that that person lived after electronic recording or mechanical recording of voice was done. So after Edison, probably. And in similar way, we can discern when the Bible was written. Each anachronism is pointing to a later and later date of authorship. One highly revealing anachronism, for instance, is when we are told that Abraham and his family originated from Ur of the Chaldeans. That would be in Genesis 11, and there are several other mentions elsewhere. And yes, Ur was indeed an ancient Sumerian city, a famous one. And Chaldea was indeed a different name for Babylonia. And Babylonians indeed occupied for a period of time and controlled the city of Ur, and even built there some temples. But it did not happen at the time of patriarchs. And even Chaldeans themselves would never call Ur as Ur of Chaldeans. Ur of Chaldeans could be written only after Ur, and Chaldeans, Babylonians, were a distant memory. Centuries later, and many, many centuries after the biblical patriarchs, or Moses for that matter. So that is telling us that that was written in Persian period or maybe Hellenistic times. But the biggest anachronism is coded directly into the biblical narratives of those 5 books of Moses themselves. It is their narrative style, because they are not written in poetry. They are written in prose. It is hard to overstate this fact. Narrative religious prose is unheard of until the Bible and Hellenistic times. And even centuries later, Al-Quran, Muslim holy book, was still written in preferred poetical style. Quran is poetry. That tells you that a Bible written in a prose narrative, is highly unique. So, what can we tell about the authors of the 5 books of Moses? Author was definitely not Moses, as we figured out. Nor were there Jews in Babylonian captivity, something which was taught in seminaries when I went there. We can tell that legal parts, when it is looking like laws, do this, do that, or something like that, or how the worship should be organized. These legal parts were written by highly educated legal experts who were well phrased in the legal tradition of the entire that region, starting from Sumerians and through Hittites and Assyrians, Babylonians, including Persians. It is possible that they started to work when they were asked by Persian rulers to write down their laws, so that Persian rulers would have written laws for all the nations they governed. And historical or narrative parts were written, an entire project of writing those books were finalized under the influence of Hellenistic culture and in the most progressive intellectual style of their times. Xenophon and Herodotus would be contemporaries or maybe leading towards this writing. So, legally, 5 books of Moses connect us with the oldest known legal traditions of the world. That is their strength, but also their limitations. They must be understood and interpreted in that context. They cannot be replicated in our own times, some parts of that being more than 4,000 years old, some parts much younger. And also, just as Hellenistic historiography, they presented some of the oldest myths and legends and presented them as the beginning of history. but it was their way of looking at it now 2,500 years ago or slightly less. That is their strength and also their weakness. They misled so many fundamentalists. They need to be properly understood and interpreted. So, what can we learn from all of this? They open before our eyes the wide and stunning panoramas, religious and legal horizons, dating to the beginning of human history, but at the same time in a great need of being interpreted. They open us towards the great respect for faith, which needs to be not blind, but critical. Respect for faith, not prejudice, but faith which is anchored in knowledge and truth and in justice. And that makes us also true heirs of biblical tradition, that we seek the truth, that we take reality seriously, even or specifically in our faith, that we do not give in to any wishful thinking, that we do not confuse faith with any delusions or self-deceptions. We reject fraud and seek scholarship and science, just like those who were authors of those 5 books of Moses, legal experts on a cutting edge of an intellectual endeavor of their time. Next Sunday, we will continue looking into Samuel's and the Kings and other historical writings of the Bible.